No worries.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I'm really delighted to have Dr. Adam Graves with us here today. Dr. Graves graduated from the Bastyr Naturopathic Medical College in 2006 and has a specialty, as I think a lot of us naturopathic docs end up doing, working with a lot with complex patients. So thanks so much, Dr. Adam, for being with us today.
Hey, thank you.
Well, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background and kind of what brought you into using self-care as medicine more and more in your practice?
Yeah, for sure. So ultimately, it came down to just patient results. I was working with a lot of patients. We were making some progress, but um, we would make some progress and feel like we kind of hit a plateau. And no matter what we changed in the protocol or the acupuncture treatment, we just weren't getting the results. And that kind of led me into um, what's the root cause, and a lot of it was looking at people's more mental, emotional aspect and mind, body, and past history of trauma, or even not so much trauma, just belief systems that we all kind of, none of us kind of makes it out of childhood unscathed, in my opinion. So it was just helping tease some of those out, and really finding that helping people through those and process some of those emotions and getting stuck was a major part that was kind of being missed in my practice, to help the patients kind of continue on their health journey.
Can you explain a little bit more about how childhood traumas or experiences might affect people into their adult life?
Sure, yeah. I mean, it's kind of endless, but um, I mean, all ranges from um, people not having the emotional support they needed as a kid, so internalizing a lot of their emotions and holding it in and suppressing them, um, to um, simple things like living in a family where maybe there was a few extra kids and they just didn't feel supported, all the way to sexual abuse, trauma, incest, suicide, things like that. And ultimately, just in my opinion, I work with a lot of patients, kind of depending on how we're raised and how we're nurtured, we're kind of, a lot of we get this overactive amygdala and limbic hijack and kind of stuck in survival mode, subconsciously. So a lot of times, I was working with people that were middle aged that have kind of been sick for years, completely mentally, emotionally exhausted. And a lot of that is that they just were so stuck in survival mode, mentally, emotionally. It was kind of getting them out of that survival mode and helping them process some of the past issues and trauma to get their body kind of in that, rest and restore and able to heal itself.
Okay. Can you use the term limbic hijacking? Can you a little bit of
Explain that.
what it is?
Yes. Well, ultimately, how to describe limbic hijacks. So as far as um, when I'm a big believer, like we're still, our mind and bodies are still pretty animalistic. We haven't really evolved to the culture that we live in now. So we have a very strong fight or flight response. The problem with the brain is we can't determine whether a bear is chasing us, or we just feel unloved and supported, or we see something at school, or we see something on TV. All that can create kind of a fight or flight response where your brain is reacting to the environment and to emotions and to people, versus responding and kind of thinking through things, processing them, and kind of responding out of your heart and your center versus reacting out of fear and your mind.
Okay.
So I see it's just kind of educating people at, and I like to say, you know, a lot of kind of pop psychology I've seen is mind over matter, where I think there's a good part, but in my experience with patients, it's not until we kind of tease out some of their past traumas and pains and beliefs, and they're able to emotionally process them, were they able to kind of turn off that overactive mind and make improvements.
Okay. So if I'm understanding it right, it's kind of that fight or flight response takes over, maybe,
Yeah.
you know, a knowing that your conscious mind has that you're safe or that this isn't as big of a threat. We could almost like filter through a hypervigilant state.
Yep.
So
Yep. Yeah. And a lot of my patients with chronic disease have kind of been in that hypervigilance for years, and to a point where they're kind of hypervigilant, but their nervous system and they're just exhausted
yeah.
mentally, emotionally, and physically, because it's just been going on for so many years.
Yeah. And I would have to agree with you. There's so many people that I sit with that once they actually slow down and start
Mm.
listening, the overwhelming response is exhaustion and
Yep.
pushing through and
Yep.
fatigue and
Yep.
overwhelm. Um,
Yep.
for those
Mm.
people who are listening to our talk today, I really want to invite everybody to take maybe even right now 3 deep breaths and just
Mm.
notice, is there that kind of well of vitality, or is
Yeah.
there kind of an overriding fatigue that you're
Mm.
pushing through or slogging through every day?
Yep.
And, I think for a lot of us, it's become our cultural norm.
Well, I think that's the problem too. Yeah, for sure. It's not only, what happens in childhood, but it's our current environment that's high stress, constant stimulation, um, very, in my opinion, intellectualized. We intellectualize and logically think about our issues, but we don't a lot of my patients have even been to counselors and logically process some of the issues, but they've never taken the time to sit and emotionally process them,
Can you
grieved, cried, and integrated that part.
Okay. And will you say a little bit more about the distinction between kind of intellectually unbraiding something and emotionally processing something? Because I think you just nailed something that's really important and so often overlooked. Again, I have a whole bunch of people that's like rolling their eyes, like, oh, this thing again. I've talked therapy
Yep.
about to death, and I feel like I've processed this, and I just don't need to
Yep.
address it anymore. But when we sit, it's
Correct.
what comes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the simplest, I mean, I don't do it the same way every person, but the simplest thing a lot of people is like, okay, yes, maybe I think part of our culture and part of the current training in, psychology is in thinking about things, intellectually processing things. And what I go back with people, they've said, well, I've been through a counselor, I've talked about that trauma. And then, but when we start to delve in, it's like, well, how do you feel? How did you feel in that situation? Were you sad? Were you lonely? Were you scared? And how can we support you to just, in my opinion, those emotions just get stored in the subconscious, and we keep reacting to the world out of those suppressed emotions.
Yeah.
So I tell people the mind's kind of like a computer and the body's like a computer. You get all the stimulation and emotions, but you have to feel and process and create space for those emotions to come out, whether that's crying or being angry or being scared,
Mm-hmm.
and move through those emotions to kind of help them release. And that way, in my opinion, you're kind of disengaging the mind and able to live more out of your heart and your consciousness.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's such an important distinction that isn't often made. Like we put such a heavy emphasis on the mind. Like,
Yeah.
well, now I understand that my mom did the best she could and it wasn't
Yeah.
her fault and I shouldn't
Yeah.
feel this way anymore. But
Yep.
it's if we check in, that's very much still what's there. So I think that's a
Exactly.
big difference between therapy and mind body medicine.
Yep. And it's okay. It's okay to feel that. Hey, you may logically understand your mom, did the best she could, but if you felt abandoned or sad, in my opinion, you also have to process those emotions, because
Absolutely.
those emotions are still there. You're still reacting to the world and to relationships and to yourself out of those emotions.
Yeah.
And that's, a lot of, we all diminish our own emotions. Like, oh, I have a lot of people that say, well, I have a good family. I live in America. My bills are paid. I'm safe. My problems aren't an issue. But I tell people pain is universal. Whether you have $1 million or no money, like pain is universal. We all have pain. We all have emotional issues. That doesn't diminish them if our physical needs are met, because our emotional issues and our emotional pain all throughout humanity needs to be processed.
Yeah. And most of us are running like hell from those emotions
Yep.
because they're uncomfortable. And that's, I
Yep.
think, where the mind gets over engaged.
Exactly.
We get so involved in all the doing because we're really not, that mind wants to protect us from the
Yep.
pain.
Exactly. Yep. And that's what I call that limbic hijack. It gets stuck down, and that mind's we're just finding distractions from the pain, which is, not only are we finding distraction, but our culture is designed to keep us distracted.
Yeah. There's a lot
So,
of
yes.
Especially with the advent of Netflix and social media.
Yes. Yes.
There's no shortage of very socially acceptable.
Exactly. There's no shortage of distractions, and there's no shortage of keeping that brain engaged, and which, in my opinion, sometimes that's okay. I tell people, hey, that's okay, but it has to be in balance. Chinese medicine, acupuncture is all about balance. So there's nothing wrong with distracting yourself, but you can't do that your whole life. You have to learn to sit and process those emotions.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a big difference too between subconscious or unconscious distraction versus conscious distraction. You know what? I've had a lot going on today and I just want to veg out, and I'm going to, binge watch some shows like that. Choosing that actively is very different than being,
being mindless about it. Yep. And it's like, hey, I just need a mental break. And if I'm not recovering tomorrow, I'll call someone or talk to someone. And I think that's where, self-care comes in, kind of being aware of what you're going on and knowing what you need. It's like, hey, I just need to go sit in front of TV and veg out for 2 hours, or I need to go, I have my patients like, just go take an Epsom salt bath and break down and cry for an hour, or have just a fall apart day where, you're locked in your room and you're under your covers crying and miserable for a day, just feeling your emotions, and fall apart for a day. And if you don't come out of it, let me know. Most people are scared they won't come out of it, but most of my patients are so used to running in survival mode, it's easy to come out. It's hard for them to fall apart.
Yeah. I often have people that say that feels self-indulgent. What do you say to
people like that? I say that's what we've been taught, and I say that's where ultimately I tell people what feels the most loving and kind towards you. If falling apart feels the most loving and kind, and loving yourself and giving yourself that space, and that's what you need to do. I think the brain has this, especially in my experience, women, they have kids, or they're caregivers, and they think, okay, if I take care of everybody else and my kids, my spouse, my friends, then I'll feel okay. But they keep pouring and pouring, and it never happens. And so I tell them, just like on an airplane, you put the oxygen mask on yourself first and everybody else. And so we're taught that it's selfish, but really that's unhealthy in my experience. And we need it has to all be in balance. You need a healthy dose of selfishness, of self-indulgence, of self-love, of self-care, because ultimately, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Right. Yeah, well, will you talk a little bit about what happens, maybe even on the physiological plane when we don't include self-care in our regimen? How does that affect?
Well, I think that's kind of what we talked about earlier. We get stuck. A lot of my patients, you get stuck overexerting yourself, constantly doing more than you should, and then that creates a lot of unfulfilled needs and anxiety and depression, because you're subconsciously expecting, hey, if I help everybody else, then my needs are going to be met.
Yeah.
And what happens is we keep trying to meet everybody's needs, and your needs are being that creates a lot of internal anxiety, you know. And that's fine, you know, like for a day or two, but over years, you know, your cortisol, your adrenaline, um, all gets out of whack, and then sleep gets off, and then anxiety and depression gets worse, and all those, you know, I tell people short term are fine, but 20, 30 years, then you're increasing the chances of heart disease and cancer, and it's just aging the body faster, in my opinion, than it should be.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of people don't realize how interlaced all those endocrine systems are. So the
Yeah,
thyroid, the reproductive hormones, the
yeah,
adrenal
yeah,
hormones, it's a big
yeah,
soup.
yeah,
And so we
exactly.
are seeing a lot of what I think in Western medicine is considered unrelated issues, thyroid malfunction, digestive issues, but I
Yeah,
think we can all tie it back to this overexertion over years.
yeah, exactly. Because we're not, I mean, I tell people, you know, if they have pets, I mean, look at your pets, how much they, or even animals in nature, how much they walk and sleep. You know, that's all kind of animals do is walk, graze, sleep, rest. They live a very recreational lifestyle, and even cultures like Europe and other cultures that value recreation over productivity have better health outcomes. You
Yeah.
know, so learning to rest and self-care and not feel guilty for it is a big thing. You know, letting go of that guilt of taking care of yourself, and trusting that if you take care of yourself and rest and recover, you'll have more to give to everybody else,
Mm.
is a big part of just helping the body restore its health.
Okay. So that's a big part of how people can actually overcome their health issues
Yeah,
is by maybe looking at these patterns that we
yeah.
are that
And just, yep, slowing down, and that's why yoga, meditation, a lot of my patients.
I think they got frozen here for a moment. Sorry, everyone who's listening. Go ahead and wait for a moment for Adam to get back online. All right, so we were talking a little bit about um, how these create health imbalances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, and then just um, giving people tools, you know, outside of working through the mental emotional, getting people tools to help calm their mind and body. So meditation's really big right now, but a lot of people, in my opinion, can go from running around trying to do things to sitting and meditating.
Mm-hmm.
So I say, you know, if you can do what I call active rest, walks in the evening, yoga, bike riding, things that you're active, hiking, but calming in nature. You know, start with just things that are, and then eventually, if that feels good for you, you can stick with that, or you can move into sitting and meditating.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of patients, you know, go from, you know, running like crazy to trying to sit and meditate and relax. It's they need a transition, in my period.
Yeah. Yeah.
And our culture is all about go hard, you know, go to the gym and push hard and go fast. And it's like, no, that's, as far as mental, emotional health for my patients, it's like, okay, yeah, if you want to do that once or twice a week for 20, 30 minutes, that's great. But you're probably going to get more benefit from going to relaxing yoga, you know, 1 or 2 hours a week, and, you know, a nice gentle walk in the evenings a couple times a week.
Yeah, I definitely noticed that I used to think you had to pick a workout schedule and then stick with it, because
Yep.
otherwise you won't go,
Yep.
or I won't go. And what I realized, especially this winter, was that going to the gym and working out hard was not what I was doing a lot of traveling and a lot of creation and my work. And I was like, that's not, I actually joined the yoga studio more regularly and started doing
Yeah.
that. And then now as the spring's coming on and, or it's summer, I guess, and
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, now I have a little more of that yang energy to,
Yep.
go a little harder
Yep.
because
Exactly.
the winter to rest and slow down.
Yeah. And I think that's because, you know, you've learned how to listen to your body and listen to your heart and find out what its needs, where we're not taught that. No one is. Our culture isn't teaching us that. And our health professionals aren't teaching us that. No one's saying, hey, slow down. It's okay. Take some deep breaths. Go on a walk. Go to yoga. If you don't, you know, my patients are like, oh, I'm going to get in a workout. I want to lose weight. So I'm going to get up at 6 a.m. 3 days a week. And I'm like, well, is that really sustainable? If you're already overtired, like, no, you don't got to beat yourself up. You don't got to punish yourself.
Yeah.
what's what's loving and kind.
Right, right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and then understanding that physiology of the cortisol of pushing
Yeah.
yourself that hard is actually going to cause you to retain weight because
Exactly.
cortisols are stress, hormones.
Exactly.
We're putting on some weight for fight or flight moments, so it's
Yeah.
you're kind of starting to understand that these aren't, I hear this a lot, like, oh, that sounds luxurious to be able to do
Yeah.
yoga or get a massage or just take a hike. Like, I gotta go in and do my 20-minute HIIT class and then get out and that sort of
Yeah.
stuff. Trying to understand that these are health essentials, not luxuries.
Exactly. If you don't, I say it catches up with everybody. If you don't start adding those things in now, you may be fine now, but in 10 years, it's that type of pace that it's going to catch up with you.
Yeah.
If you're, or in 20 years, it's going to catch up with everybody unless you start to create that balance now.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I work with a lot of patients. I just tell them, is that pace fulfilling? And they'll say no. They'll say no. It's not fulfilling. I'm running from one thing to the next, and it's not enjoyable. I'm missing out on life. And so we help them. It's like, okay, I'm a big believer in, it's like, hey, how can we help you create the life that feels better for you and create the pace that's better for you?
I love that question of asking yourself, is your schedule or your, the way you've arranged your life fulfilling?
Yeah.
I think that's pretty black and white. I don't
Yeah.
think about that for very long. Either it is or it isn't.
Yeah, basically. And if it isn't, do you feel what are you in control of that you can change? And it's like, okay, yeah, obviously people can't just quit their jobs and, move to Costa Rica and live on the beach, but we can, like, hey, switch out, time in the gym for gentle walks or yoga class, or just getting a massage, or, going and taking an Epsom salt bath and just relaxing and chilling out a little bit. So there's some wiggle room where we can find. And those things, I tell people, yeah, it may not make a big impact right away, but over time and over years, it's a large impact.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So for those of us who feel stuck, as far as, well, there's so much to do and I have to get this done, and I've got the job and the kids and the partner and the this and the that and this crazy schedule, and if I let this go, then how's it all going to get done? Like, that's the only reason I'm doing this, is because like, nothing's optional. Everything's required. So how do you advise people to get out unstuck from that belief?
Well, I talked to them about, is that an external stressor or internal stressors? Because is that outside of putting a roof over your head and food on the table, all those are pretty optional, and are you creating your own stress by feeling like it's more important than it is? And I pretty much say, is anybody going to die? Is anybody going to die if that doesn't get done?
Okay.
Is it life or death? If it's not life or death, then it's pretty optional.
Okay.
You basically, like, our mind will create stress, whether there's external stresses, or our mind will keep creating stress. So I talk to people a lot about seasons, like, well, maybe this is just a busy season. Maybe this is a few months, and that's okay. But what happens is, if life gives you a season where it's calmer, but you start finding things to stress about that you don't need to, that's where that problem comes, and we become stuck because we get addicted to that busyness. So I tell people, if it's, you got to find time and you got to create balance, and if it's okay to let things go. If it's instead of taking you 1 week to get something done, it may take you a month, it may take you 2 months, but your health is your biggest asset, and in my opinion, your mental and emotional health is your biggest asset. You know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And how much more capacity do you have when you feel refreshed and filled up and
Yep.
fulfilled?
True, exactly. That's what I tell a lot of people. Most people are running around, and it's very inefficient. You know, where if you take a day off or take some time for self-care, your productivity goes up quite a bit.
Yeah.
You know.
I read this really interesting study that said 80% of our brain energy in our current culture is used on task switching. So
Yeah.
it's not, so we're spending 20% on actually accomplishing the task and 80% jumping in, between tasks,
Yeah.
because we're convinced that multitasking works, which it doesn't.
Yeah.
And that, we have to have all this stuff on our plate rather than saying, here's the one thing I'm going to accomplish, and then I'm going to accomplish the next thing. And I'll notice that with myself, even as we sat down to prepare for the interview, I was like aware of these emails that I need to get back to. And I was like, wait a minute. And I had to very consciously bring my awareness right here and bring my presence to this interview, because that's what I'm working on right now. So one thing I've been inviting people to do, which hasn't been super successful, but I'm going to throw it out here again, and I'll just keep inviting y'all into it, is only have one window on your computer open at a time. If you're writing a document, have your Word or whatever open, and then when you're done with that, close it down, and then open your emails. Check your emails. When you're done with that, close it down. Then do your internet search for whatever. And I'm still working on this one too. You have your email popped up, so when you're looking and doing the internet research, then the email pops up and you get distracted with that. And by the end of the day, I've only gotten half of what I wanted to get done, and not very well. And my brain's tired. But it's not because I've worked so hard. It's because our brain uses a lot of energy to flip and refocus and refocus and refocus.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And that's, I know for me, I think we all have to develop these systems that helps us manage those distractions. Whether that's keeping one window closed. For me, everything I do, everything goes on kind of my master list. So I just, whatever comes in my head, instead of trying to do it or, get it done right away, it just goes on a list. And then, every day I kind of glance at the list. Okay, well, what things are urgent, what things can wait. And you have to be okay with that list never ending. Because that's just life, in my opinion. As far as a small business owner, that's my life. And it's like, okay, this stuff, it's on the list. It'll get done when it gets done, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But this belief that,
go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, we have this belief that, okay, when I get this list done, then I'll relax.
Right.
Or when I make this much money, then I'll relax. Or when, I do this. It's always a if, then, but, instead of like, all this is going on, let's relax first, and then prioritize things.
Yeah, because when we can relax into that and deepen into our own presence, it's like, well, what else is possible? And then maybe we engage help, or delegate some of that stuff. And I think the trick there is that we have to be willing to release control of the outcome. I know this when I asked my husband to prep dinner for my son, that it's probably not going to be the same dinner that I would have prepped. But he's fed, and we're all good.
Exactly.
Time to realize that I was prioritizing having it done a certain way over actually engaging in help. And then I think a lot of us, especially a lot of us ladies, then engage in, kind of complaining about our mates because they're not stepping in. It's like, well, they're not stepping in because they can't do it right. So who wants to? That's a terrible paradigm. It's just checking in with these beliefs around what it needs to be like.
And that's where I think, in my opinion, it all comes back to like, what's loving and kind? Like, is that love? It's like, what is the most loving towards yourself and towards others? It's like, we gotta, in my opinion, perfection isn't loving. Trying to be perfect and and keep it all together, like that's not very loving, but good enough. It's like, okay, yep, my kids have food, it's good enough, and I can relax a little, I'm happy, it's simplified, like that's okay, you know.
Yeah. Well, what are some other offerings you might have for our listeners to around things they can do today to start loving themselves?
Just, yeah, just whatever feels right, just self-care. Like, I think the biggest thing is unfortunately in this culture where we don't live in a village where we all take care of ourselves, we're very isolated, and ultimately the good and the bad, that self-care has to be our own doing.
Mm.
So whatever that is, if it's going and getting a mani pedicure, if it's going scheduling a massage, taking a walk this evening, if you have a huge honeydew list but you've had a crazy few weeks, it's like, putting that stuff on hold, sleeping in all day, whatever. It's really individual, but whatever feels good and gives you energy, create space for that. And it doesn't have to be all the time, but even if it's just a small window,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and I really like to link it to other stuff that you're doing. So if you're in the bathroom, urinating, take
Yep.
deep breaths, check in with your body. What else is
Yep.
going on? Or if you're
Yep.
brushing your teeth, is there a loving mantra that you can have that you do
Yeah.
while you're brushing your teeth? Can
Yep.
we start linking these and almost have like micro doses of self-care
Yeah.
medicine rather than,
Yeah.
oh, it needs to be this hour and a half that I carve out of my super full schedule. It's like, no, 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 no. It can be so much smaller.
Yep. Yeah, it can just be just slowing down throughout the day, doing things like, okay, I'm just gonna try to, if the work week is busy and the weekend you have a lot of things, it's like, well, that stuff's already booked, but at least if I'm doing it, I can do it in a slow and relaxed manner.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, building in transition time is
Yes.
such a piece of self-care.
Yes.
Between meetings or between events or coming back off vacation, I think we all want to maximize that. So we come back at midnight on Sunday and then we go
Yeah.
ground on Monday morning. And
Yeah.
in our family, we switched that a long time ago. We have at least a day at
Yeah.
home just to land, to sleep in, to do laundry,
Yeah.
just to ground.
Exactly. Yep. And I tell people it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy. These things are easy, but I say you have to live in America, but not live like an American. You know, you have to live a little bit outside the culture and just be okay with that because if you don't, you're gonna have health and disease like most Americans.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know.
absolutely. Well, Dr. Adam Graves, thank you so much for
Yep.
joining us today. I really appreciate it. And
Yeah. No problem. All right. I appreciate it. Let me know if you need anything else.
okay, thanks. Talk to you soon.
You bet. Bye bye.